just to clarify, when I say other people's stupidity, I'm certainly not talking about our
Right.
listeners, but those who are featured in these articles.
Yes, exactly. But if you want to share your own stupidity, that's fine too. We'll
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 153. And today I'm joined by my unindicted co-conspirator, John Bennett, the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. Pastor, welcome back, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too. Or in church calendar, New Year's Day is the circumcision in the name of Jesus. So, as I jokingly like to say, Happy Snip Snip.
Well, I hope you had a great Christmas. I know you must be well rested with all the downtime that pastors get during Advent and Christmas.
Yeah. You know what? It's amazing. This was the first year that I can remember in a long time where I did not get sicker than a dog after Christmas.
Oh, that's true. We're always scrounging around for content right after Christmas because one or the other of us is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's good to get back together, and fans of the show, you can tell we've got something different going on today. As I mentioned last week, we're doing something a little different this year. Every other week, Pastor Bennett will be my wingman for the entire show, and we're going to be doing some of the tried and true sort of clinging to God and guns stuff, reviewing articles and videos, taking on important topics. But we also have some new ideas, and today we're going to begin bringing you one of those. We'll call it, I don't know, Crime in the Ten Commandments. That sounds like it'll work.
Works for me.
All right, and we'll take a quick break, and we'll come back with that right after this. You're listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a proud member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.
You can help support Armed Lutheran Radio just by listening to the show. Go to armedlutheran.us/radio and download the Radio Public app and start listening.
I want to take a minute here to thank our partner, the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. If you're involved in a situation where you have to use your firearm in self-defense, you very well may find yourself in a legal battle against overzealous prosecutors or the families of the criminal who you shot or threatened, who are looking to deprive you of your freedom or your hard-earned savings. You may find yourself charged with a crime or facing a civil lawsuit even if you did nothing wrong. That's where Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network comes in. For a small yearly fee, they will provide you with money for attorneys, money for bail, consultations, and access to experts like Marty Hayes and Masad Ayub. Don't face the fight alone. Visit Armed Citizens Network today. Use the promo code ARMEDLutheran-25. Save $25 off your first year's membership, or you can grab the coupon on my website, armedlutheran.us. Sign up today. They will send you lots of cool resources, 8 instructional DVDs, and a book by Masad Ayub that I cannot recommend highly enough. Don't wait until you need their help. Be prepared. Sign up today. Visit armedcitizensnetwork.org. Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. It's our first Clinging to God and Guns episode of 2019, and we're debuting an idea I guess we'll call Crime and the Ten Commandments, and here's how it's going to work. We've both got some stories from recent news, crime stories, self-defense stories, that sort of thing. We're going to discuss them, and we're also going to be discussing how the Ten Commandments apply to those news stories and how you can apply the Ten Commandments, use the Ten Commandments when you're thinking about these things. We haven't shared these stories with each other, so we're coming at this completely cold. And the first one that I have on my list today is from The Blaze, and it's from January 8th, 2019. And this is the story from Houston. The family of a white man wrongly accused of murdering a 7-year-old black child has revealed that they're receiving death threats in connection with the allegations. On December 30th, Jasmine Barnes was gunned down on a Houston freeway near Walmart while in the car with her family. Houston police ruled the death a homicide. Early investigators on social media said the shooting suspect was white. The 2 men were charged in connection with the child's murder, both of them turning out to be black, not white. Like activist Sean King, a.k.a. Talcum X, initially claimed in what he suggested was a racially motivated crime. Robert Cantrell was the man King pointed to on social media in a since-deleted post, writing, "We've had 20 people call or email us and say this guy is a racist, violent, expletive, and always has been. Just tell me everything you know." Cantrell's niece told the news that her family has received a plethora, and extra points for plethora, of death threats since activist King wrongly accused him. And King eventually did issue a sort of an apology for falsely accusing Mr. Cantrell. So what do we got here? Thoughts on this story?
Yeah, this is a really screwed up story. I hadn't heard the follow-up yet that they had found the men that were responsible and they turned out to be black, because in the media it was, they had all these pictures of the suspect's truck. It was this red pickup. They were saying it was a white man. There was another woman a few months back who was murdered in cold blood, another unsolved crime, and they were trying to say that, this is the evidence of a racial killer, and I even saw the term serial killer being floated out there too. And here they find out, oh, it was a black man. Oh, geez, that's inconvenient for our talking points, isn't it?
Right. Nothing to see here. Move along.
Right.
So, which of what commandments we got involved in this story?
Well, you could almost set up a dartboard with all 10 of them and have a pretty good shot. It's the 8th commandment is a huge one here. This activist, Sean King, gosh, what they should be referring to him is as a race hustler, because that's what he has been in all of this. And he was the one that was floating out these allegations that this was some white man who was on a killing spree and so forth. And it's just, we already have enough racial division in this country. It's funny because we weren't as nearly divided today before the election in 2008.
That's true. Yeah, very true. It's only gotten worse. Obama was supposed to unify us for the first black president, and it only created more division. And with Trump's election, and the hysteria surrounding that, it's only gotten worse and worse here. The 8th commandment, of course, being you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And then obviously there's another biggie that applies in 2 different ways. One being with the killing of the young girl, and also with the death threats. Right.
Yeah, the 5th commandment, you have a responsibility according to the 5th commandment. It's not just, when you look at Luther's Small Catechism, you have the commandment, which is what you should not be doing. And then if you look at Luther's explanation to the commandments, it includes what we ought to be doing, which is defending our neighbor. And here this guy, Sean King, so irresponsibly goes out and names someone without any evidence whatsoever. If this man had been killed or his family had been harmed in any way, this Sean King would be held responsible. It would be great. And I would, I'm not one who encourages a sue happy society, because it's become very problematic in our world. But this is one of those cases where I say, sue the living daylights out of this guy to set an example of being an upstanding member of society means having integrity and not speaking falsehood. It's just, how would he have felt if this was his family?
So not only are in applying the 8th commandment and saying, hey, don't falsely accuse people, don't slander people, don't dig up dirt on them. And instead of violating the fifth by then threatening this guy's life and his family, we should be saying, hey, standing up for this person, trying to put the best construction on everything, and saying, hey, wait a minute, we don't have all the evidence here. And this doesn't just apply to this story. This in society seems like we have this knee-jerk reaction to accept whatever news we hear first, especially if it's really saucy or if it really gets our dander up. And about 9 times out of 10, whatever the initial story is turns out to be completely different from reality. And so we're not doing ourselves any favors. We're actually, in many cases, violating the Eighth Commandment by jumping to these conclusions instead of stepping back and saying, let's wait for a little more evidence here before we make up our minds.
Right.
So what have you got for us?
Well, the one that I have is actually not from recent events. It's actually an old story, but for some reason this story came to mind, and I decided that this is what I was going to use because it's a local story from my neck of the woods. And this goes back to December 23rd and 24th of 2006. There was an article that appeared in the Star Tribune, a Minneapolis paper, and Amboy, Minnesota, which is a town just 8 miles from here. A shocked silence hung over the southern Minnesota town on Christmas Eve as residents wrestled with news of a shootout that left an Amboy man dead and a Mankato police officer seriously wounded. Jeffrey Scarevold, 41, shot himself to death early Sunday morning after police tear-gassed his home about a mile west of Amboy, authorities said at a brief Sunday news conference. Scarevold's apparent suicide came after a 7-hour standoff that began as a domestic dispute between him and his wife and ended with more than 50 state and local police officers on the scene. Earlier, officers said Scarevold shot 2 police officers in the head, one of whom was probably saved by his helmet. Chris Nelson, 44, of the St. Peter Police Department, was resting at home Sunday with his family, authorities said. The other officer, 37-year-old Robert Sadusky of the Mankato Police Department, was in serious condition after head surgery at St. Mary's Hospital in Rochester. As Scarevold held off police, he took phone calls from friends and family and spoke to a reporter for the Mankato Free Press. In that newspaper's report, Scarevold claimed in a phone conversation that a Blue Earth County Sheriff's deputy entered his house about 4 p.m. Saturday while he was arguing with his wife, Cindy. Scarevold reached for a rifle, not realizing that the stranger in his home was a deputy. A struggle ensued and police used a taser shocking device on him. Scarevold and the deputies exchanged gunfire according to his version of the story, and Scarevold was shot in the stomach before the deputies retreated. Scarevold's wife escaped the house unharmed. At the news conference Sunday, police gave a different account. According to Peterson of the Department of Public Safety, 2 Blue Earth Sheriff's deputies initially approached Scarevold's house and realized he was armed. They retreated without engaging him, Peterson said, and called for backup from a regional tactical response team composed of members from several area police agencies. Peterson confirmed that tactical response officers did use a taser on Scarevold to try and bring a peaceful resolution to the incident. That didn't work, Peterson said. When the response team went in, Peterson said Scarevold opened fire, shooting Nelson and Sadusky. The response team retreated and brought in a larger backup team, including members of the State Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and the Minnesota State Patrol. Police negotiators spent hours trying to get Scarevold to surrender. Finally, early Sunday morning, which was Christmas Eve, they shot tear gas into his house. Moments later, Peterson said the police heard a single gunshot. They entered the house and found Scarevold dead. Peterson declined to release further details, saying the case is under investigation. Few residents of Amboy would talk about the incident Sunday, with some saying they didn't want to discuss it until after Christmas. One resident who did talk was Bruce Keitzer, who happened to be one of my church members, who worked with Scarevold on a hog farm about 2 years ago. Scarevold's job was washing out hog crates with a high-pressure sprayer. Keitzer said he was a fun guy at work who liked to joke around. I just don't know what to think of this, Keitzer said. It's something we never expect to happen here.
And they never do.
No. And the reason, and I don't know why I was thinking of this, but I had the task of burying that individual.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he wasn't. I was serving a vacancy at another church at the time. His wife had been confirmed in that church, but hadn't gone since she had been confirmed. And since that was the closest relation they had with any church, I was asked to do the burial. Lucky me.
Wow, that must have been fun.
Yes. Yeah.
Was the funeral sermon that day about the fourth, the fifth, and sixth commandments?
Well, there actually wasn't a funeral.
Oh,
There was a visitation. He was cremated, and then I presided at a graveside service.
gotcha.
So at least, I mean, they didn't ask me to do a funeral, which I would have had to decline and say, look, I didn't know him. He wasn't a member of the congregation.
Right.
Because of the circumstances, I can't in good conscience do a funeral, at least certainly not in the church.
Right.
I probably would have done a funeral at the funeral home, but that was, jacked up situation all around. And I know some of the details that were never released to the media because I spoke with some officers who were there on the scene when all this took place.
And a member of your church knew the guy, so that's interesting.
Yes.
Wow. So I'm guessing we've got the sixth commandment because of the domestic dispute with the wife.
Right. Yep.
Um,
And just as a reminder for, the sixth commandment isn't just about adultery. Again, the explanation that Luther provides tells us what we ought to be doing, and it says husband and wife love and honor each other, which,
Right.
and the way the story goes, I don't recall if this was released in any other news reports, but him and his wife got in this argument. He went out with his gun and shot out the tires on his wife's vehicle so she couldn't leave, and a friend ended up coming and picking her up before police arrived. So, I mean, this was somebody who certainly wasn't in his right. I mean, no matter how upset I was at my wife, I can't imagine going out and shooting out the tires on her vehicle so she couldn't leave, especially since tires aren't cheap.
Right, so we got property damage on top of this.
So there's a seventh commandment issue.
There's a seventh commandment issue, which is, and again, seventh commandment, thou shalt not steal. But there's, as we've been talking about, there's also the implicit, you should, help your neighbor, protect their property, and we'll talk about that. We got a story coming up here in a minute that talks a little more about that as well. We've got obviously fourth commandment issue with his resisting of the police and his shooting at police officers.
Yes.
Not submitting to the authorities.
Clear fifth commandment issues here.
Clearly fifth commandment in the shooting of the officers and his own suicide. And
right.
We don't know. It doesn't specify in the article whether or not he physically assaulted his wife, but potentially a fifth commandment issue there as well.
Right. And I'm going to go out on a little bit of a limb here too. And I'm just saying this based on the eyewitness reports of at least one officer that I had spoken with. And I'm not going to, of course, mention any names here, but there could be an eighth commandment issue here,
okay,
as well as a fifth commandment issue on the side of law enforcement.
Oh, okay.
And now, first, I'm going to preface this by saying I am very supportive of our police officers. They have a tough job to do, and there's bad apples in every profession in the world.
Yep. Whether
it's police officers or if it's pastors. But this is one of the things, and I think this is simply a symptom of the overly litigious society that we live in, that it would be great if law enforcement would be more transparent, but so often they don't give the whole story because they don't want to expose themselves to any liability. So one thing that did happen in this case was at one point he was coming out of the house with his hands up to surrender himself. Mm. It did mention in all the news stories, it did mention that he was tased. He was tased while he was coming out of the house with his hands up.
Oh, okay.
And the reason why it was ineffective is because he was wearing a heavy coat and the barbs of the taser did not penetrate his clothing.
Gotcha.
So you can say that there's an eighth commandment issue there because there was they're not telling the whole story.
Right.
And then you can throw out the fifth commandment that, well, if he's surrendering, why'd you tase him?
Right.
Because that right there could have been the end of it. But, the situation went from bad to craptastic at that point.
Yep.
Just the high point of this is that and of course, the officers that were shot were shot with an AR-15.
Ooh.
And they both survived headshots.
That's wow.
The one, his ballistic helmet deflected the round. The other, it penetrated, but I think that officer lost his eye, if I recall correctly. But he did survive.
And there's a couple of other kind of tangential issues here as well, based on what you were telling me about this couple. You've also possibly got a third commandment issue. You're talking about the wife who was confirmed but was not churched after that point.
Right.
And so that kind of all leads back to, well, if they're not in church, then there's potentially that first commandment issue as well.
Right. And here's something that's interesting too. And this bleeds over back into the sixth commandment. And this is where I would encourage all of our listeners that be faithful in worship with your spouse. That the divorce rate for those who attend church regularly and have an active faith life is roughly 10%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
There was a study that was done. I don't recall the exact specifics of the study, but that is the one thing I do remember, that for couples that were active in their faith, worshiping together and so forth, roughly 10%.
Gotcha.
So if you want to safeguard your marriage, get your butt to church.
Exactly. Well, and let's address real quick for those who've heard this. I'm sure we all have at some point. The people who say they don't need to go to church, they don't need to be in church to worship God. Why are we commanded to go to church, and where does that come from in Scripture?
Well, we have the third commandment: remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy.
Right.
St. Paul writes to not forsake the gathering together of one another on the Lord's day. And the reason for all of this isn't because, God is some narcissist and he feels better about himself when we all go to church and worship. It's for our own darn good. It's for our spiritual well-being. It's so our souls will be fed, so we receive the means of grace.
So it's not what we give to God when we're in church. It's what God is providing to us. It's the gifts that we receive, His Word, His sacrament, absolution when we're in church.
Exactly.
All right. Well, I've got, I think we can squeeze in another one here. And like I mentioned earlier, this has got an interesting seventh commandment twist, I think. This is from AmmoLand, and this is December 27th by Dean Weingarten. On the afternoon of December 22nd, two young men decided to steal from a coastal farm and ranch store in Marysville, Washington. The two young men took nail guns worth about $3,200 from the store without paying. They didn't expect to be surrounded by 6 customers with guns. One standing in front of their car yelling at the alleged thieves to get out. He won't shoot, run him over, one of the suspects reportedly said. The driver pulled forward, causing the man confronting him to land on the hood, according to court papers. Another customer shot at the driver's side front tire, according to documents, and a third fired twice at a rear tire. Another responsible citizen followed. Now, notice how they use the word responsible.
Responsible.
Yes. Despite what this guy says later in the article by trying to explain all this away, we should put responsible in air quotes here. Another responsible citizen followed the car until he thought they showed a gun, and then he backed off. The car was found 3 blocks away with 2 flat tires. All the merchandise was inside. The police deployed a dog to track the suspects. The 2 suspects, 22 and 23 years old, were taken into custody. The armed citizens, now trying to justify their actions, did not fire until the driver of the getaway car committed assault on an armed citizen attempting to detain them. The armed citizen who was struck with the car is in good condition. He did not need to be hospitalized. The 2 suspects have been charged with felonies. What have we got? Your thoughts on this story and how the commandments apply?
Well, since there isn't a commandment for aggravated stupidity, where do we start? Well, we have the very obvious here with the seventh commandment with theft. At the same time, we have a fifth commandment issue here because something could have gone terribly wrong where they might have shot one of these two idiots.
Right?
Yeah, I think there is a certain level of derpiness within the Second Amendment community where you have some that are just itching for an opportunity to draw their concealed firearm. Now, if that's you, stop listening now and
You're only gonna
surrender your firearms. It's
That's right.
for the sake of humanity. Amend your wicked ways for the love of God. It's no one's life was in danger
Right.
until these quote unquote responsible citizens decided to take it upon themselves to draw their firearms in protection of a few nail guns.
I would love to have heard how Aaron Israel dissected this story. Oh my goodness. So we have a seventh commandment issue with the theft, but
one thing that we haven't covered, and this is just coming to mind because I was teaching this in confirmation class just last night, is that the ninth and 10th commandments that deal with coveting,
right,
that the sin of coveting is the sin that precedes the sin of theft. The difference between covetousness, or what makes covetousness sin, it's one thing for me to say, I really like your gun, Lloyd. I would love to have one just like it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's just mere wishful thinking.
Right.
Where it moves into the sin of covetousness is where I say, Lloyd, I want your gun for myself.
Right, exactly.
And so it's the desire of theft. And so once you have established that desire of theft, then the actual theft itself isn't too far of a jump.
Right. And if you've ever heard Pastor Brian Wolfmueller, some of his grappling with the text videos, if you've ever seen any of those, there's one where he talks about how if you think about the Ten Commandments, everything, really, most of the other sins against the commandments start with covetousness. You covet someone's wife, so you commit adultery, or maybe you kill that woman's lover so that you can have her for yourself, or you want that thing in the store, so you go out and you steal it. So, or you speak badly of them, in order to gain something. It all starts with covetousness, and that winds its way through the commandments.
Right. And it's interesting because that's one of the commandments, the sin of coveting is one that's so often overlooked.
Right.
But it's one that is also so crucial to the life of a Christian that if you can, through the help of God, avoid the sin of covetousness, you can certainly live a far more sanctified life. Besides that, if you have this problem of covetousness, you're going to be just the absolutely most miserable person on earth because you're going to spend your days wishing you had someone else's property for yourself, and when you get it, you're just going to be miserable.
Grass is always greener on the other side of the fence until you get on the other side of the fence.
Right.
So you've got the 9th and 10th commandment issues here. We've got the 7th commandment in that they stole the nail guns. But we also have the implied command in the 7th commandment to protect your neighbor's property. Were the good, responsible, quote-unquote, citizens upholding the 7th commandment when they stepped in to try to stop these thefts?
That's a tough one for me. Yes, that's certainly a good intention to safeguard your neighbor's property. But as the old saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Right.
Sometimes the road to the morgue is also paved with good intentions too. I shouldn't say that laughingly because there have been people who have lost their life trying to defend somebody when they didn't need to.
Right.
But there wasn't an obligation according to the Ten Commandments to take things as far as they did. It's one thing to try and stop them at the door and say, look, guys, those don't belong to you. and there's 6 of you.
Right.
If there's 6 of you, you should be able to hold off a 22 and 23-year-old with just the 6 of you.
But they waited until they got to the car, and then one of them got bumped by the car, and suddenly it's a lethal force issue or situation, and now you've backed yourself into the corner where you might, and thank goodness they didn't shoot at these guys when the one Good Samaritan was hit by the car. That could have very easily escalated into Fifth Commandment and taking somebody's life over property.
Well, and yeah, how good would you have felt at the end of the day if you had pulled the trigger and shot one of these knuckleheads and injured seriously or killed him?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, we got the nail guns back.
So,
and there's the Fourth Commandment issue here too with, we have laws against theft, and the Fourth Commandment deals with all orders of authority.
Is there also a Fourth Commandment issue here with the citizens assuming the role of the state and taking the law into their own hands here?
You could say that they have tried to assume authority that was not legally theirs.
Mm-hmm.
It's no matter how much a person may think of yourself, if you catch somebody stealing from a store, you don't have the authority as a private citizen to pull your firearm and force them to cease and desist.
Right.
And that's the part that just boggles my mind here. And maybe I'll take a look at the article later to see how the author tries to justify this. But if there's any justifying this, you'd have to call it justifiable stupidity at this point.
Well, the author says this common wisdom put forward in the media for 50 years is don't get involved, let the police handle it. That may be good advice for an individual, but it's terrible advice for society. It's only when individuals are willing to take risks to defend society, to prevent and deter evil acts, that civil society is maintained and improved. An active partnership between the police and citizenry results in low crime rates. And that's where I just started, pulling my hair out.
And immediately I'm thinking of the Andy Griffith Show and Gomer Pyle running around saying, "Citizens arrest, citizens arrest."
Yep. I don't know how society is improved when 6 guys decide to pull firearms and try to detain somebody over $3,200 worth of nail guns. It just, like you said, there's a certain level of derp that we have to put up with, unfortunately, in the pro-gun community that sometimes just boggles the mind.
Well, yeah, and look what the easy alternative could have been here. They could have, I'm sure one of those 6 guys must have had a smartphone. He could have whipped it out, started recording these knuckleheads, gotten their faces on video, gotten their license plate on video, and the police would have likely caught them, and you would have had the same outcome without having to act like a bunch of idiots.
That's the responsible citizen thing. That's what the responsible citizen, especially the responsible citizen with a firearm, should have done, is to be a good witness for police so that police can do their lawfully ordained job, and not, because this is not, as the officer or as the author describes it, this is not a partnership between police and citizens. This is citizens taking on the role of the police, and it's not for them to do, and it's dangerous on top of that.
Well, and I'd love to hear some feedback, maybe from Bill on this, but if a law enforcement officer would have been faced with this same situation, would have he had his firearm drawn, pointed at the suspects at that point over property? I mean, of course, I don't know police procedure, but in an instance like that, I wonder what a law officer would have done if he had been on the scene.
Right. Would he have stepped in front of a vehicle and put himself in jeopardy over $3,200 worth of real property? I would be surprised.
Right.
All right. Well, that was fun. This was our first attempt at this, and I think this worked out pretty well. We'll try this again in the future. I think this was interesting and informative. What do you think?
Absolutely, and it's also, a great opportunity for our listeners to interact with us and send us stories that they come across, because It's always fun when you deal with other people's stupidity, right?
Right, exactly. So if you have any comments or questions about some of the things that we discussed here today, disagree with our opinions, or have an article that you would like us to dissect, visit our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback and send us a voicemail or a voice message or an email. We'd love to hear from you and respond in a future episode.
Just to clarify, when I say other people's stupidity, I'm certainly not talking about our
Right.
listeners, but those who are featured in these articles.
Yes, exactly. But if you want to share your own stupidity, that's fine too. Pastor, thank you for joining us. I appreciate it.
As always, a pleasure.
And thank you all for listening. Tune in next time. Next week will be another of our variety show episodes. Hope you'll tune in again for that right here on Armed Lutheran Radio.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.